a 10-year-old boy standing in the middle of the aisle. And then, with a voice steadier than anyone expected, he spoke. "Stop the trial! I have something to say!" Gasps erupted. Reporters scrambled for their cameras. The judge hesitated, something she never did, because somehow, in a case where the evidence seemed undeniable, this boy knew something that could change everything. But what he didn't know was that speaking the truth would put him in unimaginable danger. Where are you watching from? Write it down in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because this story is just getting started. The courtroom was suffocating with tension, a place where justice was supposed to be served, now thick with whispered rumors and piercing stares. This was no ordinary trial. A high-profile murder case had captured the attention of an entire nation. The prosecution stood tall, delivering their final arguments, the defense scrambling to hold ground. The jury sat motionless, absorbing every word. The accused, Lucas Hart, sat at the defense table, his hands clenched into fists, his face hollow, drained of hope. The evidence was stacked against him. The world had already decided. Lucas was guilty, and then a voice rang out, clear, unshaken. "Stop the trial!" The courtroom froze. A boy, no older than 10, stood in the middle of the aisle. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't part of the trial. But his voice? It cut through the silence like a knife. The judge's gavel stopped midair. The defense attorney dropped his papers. The prosecutor's mouth hung open, as if someone had paused him mid-sentence. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Whispers turned to chaos. The judge, a woman feared for her no-nonsense approach, regained her composure first. Her sharp gaze locked onto the boy, her voice like steel. "Bailiff, get that child out of here!" The bailiff moved forward, but before he could take a step, the boy shouted again, "You can't throw me out! I know something that will change everything!" His voice cracked with emotion, but he stood firm. More whispers. The courtroom trembled with curiosity. Reporters scrambled for their cameras. Spectators leaned forward. The judge hesitated. Something in the boy's face, his wide, determined eyes, his trembling hands balled into fists at his sides, stopped her. She studied him for a long moment, and then she made a decision. "Take him to my chambers," she ordered the bailiff. "We'll continue this conversation in private." The uproar in the courtroom was deafening. Reporters rushed to the exits, eager to break the news. "Child interrupts murder trial, claims to know the truth." As the bailiff gently led the boy toward the judge's private office, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. His eyes locked onto Lucas Hart, the man accused of murder. And in that moment, for the first time in months, Lucas Hart looked hopeful. The heavy courtroom doors slammed shut, and only one question remained. What does this boy know? Alex Parker was just a normal kid. He rode his bike too fast, ate too much pizza on weekends, and spent summers at the park playing baseball until the streetlights flickered on. He wasn't the type of kid who stood out, wasn't the type who people noticed. But he noticed things. His mother always said he had an old soul, that he saw the world differently than most kids his age. He never really understood what she meant, until that day. It was an ordinary afternoon, the sun high, the lake shimmering in the distance. Alex had been riding his bike through the park, the wind rushing against his face, when he saw them. A man, a woman, arguing. At first it seemed like just another couple having a fight, but something felt off. The man kept glancing around, his movements nervous, fidgety. The woman, her body tense, her face pale, kept shaking her head, backing away. And then, he grabbed her arm. She yanked back, trying to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. Alex's heart pounded as he slid off his bike and ducked behind a tree. His hands tightened around the bark as he watched, holding his breath. The woman struggled harder, her voice rising. She was scared. Then, in one swift motion, the man shoved her into a car. The door slammed shut. She was gone. The dark blue car peeled away, kicking up dust as it sped down the road. Alex stood there, frozen, his pulse hammering in his ears. He wanted to do something, wanted to run after the car, to scream, to stop it. But what could a kid do? So he went home. Told himself it was probably nothing. Maybe just a bad argument. But deep down, he knew better. And then, the news broke. A body had been found. Alyssa Green. Murdered. The prime suspect? Lucas Hart. The moment Alex saw his face on TV, his blood ran cold. It was him. The man from the park. The man who had shoved a woman into a car that day. But something wasn't right. Alyssa Green had dark hair. The woman Alex saw? Blonde. His stomach twisted. He wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, that it wasn't real. But the image burned in his mind. The way she had struggled, the way she had looked around, desperate, searching for help. And Alex had just stood there. For days, he tried to push it away. But every night, when he closed his eyes, he saw her face, pale, lifeless. Why didn't you say something? The whispers clawed at him, haunting him. The trial was approaching. Lucas Hart was going to prison for murder. And Alex knew one thing for sure. He couldn't stay silent anymore. Alex Parker had spent days trapped in his own head. The memory of the woman in the park, the way she had struggled, the way she had looked at him, begging for help, it wouldn't leave him. And now, the trial was happening. Lucas Hart was going to prison for a murder he might not have committed. Alex couldn't let that happen. He had to do something. One morning, as his mother was getting ready for jury duty, he saw his chance. "Can I come with you?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I just want to see what a real courtroom looks like. I promise I'll be quiet." His mother hesitated. "A murder trial isn't exactly a place for kids, Alex." He put on his best innocent face. "Please? I just want to watch. Just once." She sighed. "Fine. But you sit in the back, and you do not move." Alex nodded. But he already knew. He wasn't just going to watch. When they arrived, his mother disappeared into the jury room, leaving him with a book and a granola bar on a bench outside the courtroom. But the moment she was gone, he slipped through the heavy courtroom doors. Inside, the trial was already in full swing. The prosecution stood tall, presenting their case with absolute confidence. The evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses claimed they had heard Lucas and Alyssa arguing. His fingerprints were on her belongings. His alibi was weak. It sounded airtight. And then, Lucas Hart took the stand. Alex's breath caught in his throat. This was him, the man from the park. But something was wrong. Lucas didn't look like a murderer. His shoulders were slumped, his hands fidgeting, his voice barely above a whisper. The way he spoke, the tired, defeated tone. This wasn't a man trying to cover up a crime. This was a man who had already lost everything. And suddenly, Alex knew. Lucas Hart wasn't the killer. The real murderer was still out there. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The prosecution continued, their voices echoing around him, but Alex didn't hear them. He could only hear the woman's scream, the sound of the car door slamming shut, the terrified look in her eyes. Then, silence. The courtroom blurred around him, his hands clenched into fists. And before he could stop himself, before he could think about what would happen next, his legs moved, and his voice exploded into the air. "Stop the trial!" The entire courtroom froze. The judge's gavel stopped mid-motion. The defense attorney's papers slipped from his hands. The prosecutor's mouth fell open. Gasps rippled through the room. Every single pair of eyes turned to him. Alex felt his chest tighten. His palms were sweating. His whole body felt like it had just leaped off a cliff. But he stood his ground. I have something to say. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind Alex Parker as the bailiff led him into the judge's chambers. The air inside felt different, heavy, suffocating. It wasn't like the courtroom where voices clashed, cameras flashed, and people whispered. Here, it was just him, and the most powerful person in the room. Judge Margaret Whitmore sat behind a massive oak desk, her sharp eyes studying him like a puzzle she wasn't sure how to solve. Her gavel rested beside her, untouched. The silence stretched. Then, finally, she spoke. You've caused quite a disruption today, young man. Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry. I had to, he said, his voice steadier than he expected. The judge leaned forward, folding her hands in front of her. Are you absolutely certain about what you saw? There it was. The moment. The question. He could lie. Say he wasn't sure. That he had just been confused. That maybe he had imagined it all. Or he could tell the truth. And if he did, there was no turning back. Alex took a deep breath, gripping the arms of his chair. I saw them, he said, his voice unwavering. A man and a woman arguing in the park. The woman was scared, really scared. She tried to get away, but he wouldn't let her. He forced her into his car and drove off. The judge didn't move, didn't blink. So Alex kept going. That woman, she had blonde hair. But the news said Alyssa Green had dark hair. That means the woman I saw wasn't her. It means Lucas Hart might not be guilty. Silence. The defense attorney shifted forward, something flickering behind his eyes. If there was another woman, he said slowly, then the timeline is wrong. This could change everything. But then, a scoff. The prosecutor leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his voice dripping with disdain. It's a child's story, he sneered. No proof, just wild imagination. Alex's stomach twisted. Judge Whitmore let out a slow sigh, rubbing her temples. We need more evidence, she finally said, her voice firm. The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But deep down, he knew. This was just the beginning. Alex Parker sat alone in his room, the glow of his dad's old laptop flickering across his face. His hands hovered over the keyboard, his mind racing. Judge Whitmore had listened to him, but it wasn't enough. They needed proof. If no one else was going to find it, he would. He pulled up news archives, police reports, anything he could find about Alyssa Green's case. He scrolled for hours, scanning every detail, every witness statement, looking for something, anything that didn't fit. Then, his eyes locked onto a photo of Alyssa. She was smiling, a coffee cup in her hand. But it wasn't her face that made Alex's stomach drop. It was what was hanging from her purse, a sunflower keychain. His breath caught. The same sunflower keychain he had seen in the park that day. The same keychain clutched in the woman's hand as she fought to escape. His fingers tightened around the laptop. Alyssa had been there, that day, which meant that Lucas Hart didn't kill her. But then, who did? Alex's heart pounded as he dug deeper. The car, the one that had taken her away. It was dark blue. He remembered that much. He searched through vehicle records, police statements, anything that mentioned a car. And then, he found it. A dark blue sedan, registered to Kyle Becker, Alyssa's ex-boyfriend. Alex's stomach twisted. The police had never even looked into him. Everything had been focused on Lucas Hart. But what if the real killer had been right there all along? His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up old social media posts, messages, anything that could connect Kyle to Alyssa in the days before her death. And then, his laptop screen flickered. A new email appeared. No subject line, no sender. His pulse thundered as he clicked it open. The message was short. You don't know what you're getting into. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. His fingers went cold. Then he saw the attachment. His hands shook as he clicked on it. The image loaded pixel by pixel. His breath hitched. It was a photo of his mother, taken that morning. A chill ran down his spine. Someone was watching, and now they knew he was getting too close. The house was silent. Too silent. Alex Parker lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. The email, the photo of his mother, the warning. Someone was watching them, and they weren't just threats anymore. Then, a sound. Rustling outside his window. Alex's breath hitched. Slowly he sat up, his pulse hammering as he crept toward the curtain. His fingers trembled as he pulled it back just an inch. And there, standing beneath the street lamp, a figure in black, motionless, watching. His stomach twisted. He backed away from the window, his heart pounding against his ribs. And then, the doorknob downstairs rattled. His blood ran cold. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Then, bang. The lock snapped. They were inside. Alex whirled around, bolting down the hallway. "Mom!" he hissed, shaking her awake. Jessica's eyes fluttered open, confusion turning to fear as another loud thud echoed through the house. She grabbed his arm and yanked him into the closet, slamming the door shut. Her hands shook as she dialed 911. "Someone broke into our house," she whispered. "We're hiding, please hurry." Footsteps moved through the hallway. Closer. Then, a voice, low, cold. "You should have stayed quiet." Alex clutched his mother's arm. His heartbeat pounded so loudly he swore the intruder could hear it. The closet door shook. Jessica covered Alex's mouth, her breathing shallow, rapid. Then, sirens. Loud, piercing. Flashing red and blue lights lit up the windows. Footsteps rushed away. The front door slammed open. Shouts, commands, police flooding the house. But by the time they stormed inside, the man was gone. But he left something behind. A black leather glove. And inside, a business card. The name on it? Kyle Becker. The police moved fast. By morning, Kyle Becker was in handcuffs. And Alex? He had just survived the most terrifying night of his life. But it wasn't over yet. The courtroom was packed, cameras flashed, reporters whispered. The world was watching. This was it. The trial that had once seemed so certain had been shattered. Because of a 10-year-old boy. Alex Parker sat in the front row, his mother beside him, gripping his hand. The judge took her seat, looking down at the courtroom with finality. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood, a breathless pause. "We find the defendant, Kyle Becker, guilty on all charges." A wave of gasps and murmurs. Across the room, Lucas Hart buried his face in his hands, not in despair, in relief. He had spent months behind bars, accused of a crime he didn't commit. Now, he was finally free. The judge turned to Lucas, her voice steady. "Mr. Hart, in light of this new evidence, all charges against you are hereby dismissed. You are free to go." Alex exhaled. It was over. He had done it. As the courtroom erupted into noise, as cameras flashed, as people rushed to understand how a child had unraveled a murder case. Alex just sat there, his heart finally steady. A few weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. Not from the courts, not from the police, but from Lucas Hart. "You saved my life," it read, "not just by speaking up, but by proving that the truth is always worth fighting for." And Alex knew. This wasn't just about one case. There were other kids out there who had seen things, who knew the truth but were too afraid to speak. So he started the Brave Voices Project, a place where kids could be heard, where they could speak without fear. Because sometimes, even the smallest voices, can change the world. Like, subscribe, and share if this story inspired you. What would you do? If you were in Alex's shoes, would you have spoken up? Or would fear have kept you silent? Comment below and let us know, because sometimes one voice is all it takes to change.